Konnichiwa, fellow armchair General Sama. This is Gamer, 1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 4 with Black X. I must say, I'm really enjoying this playthrough. It's not just that I don't, well, thinking back to my great game, Hearts of Iron 3, and we were invading the Soviet Union and I was trying to take Moscow. And with the supply problems, the bad supply situation, I'm not talking about winter effect supply situation, I'm talking about the damn bad base supply setup that just couldn't supply it and all that. That can get really frustrating, and not looking forward to that at that moment. So I can definitely say that there are times that I look forward to playing a game more than others. Okay, we are shifting some of our names, abandoning the sea. Some of our. So right now, I'm gonna a couple more days and then we'll plan ahead on this game, so that just in case I'm doing it, play more. We're shifting the navy down here. We're gonna Wang Z, click, push you back. That's where we'll maybe. What I think we're going to do is, well, what we're going to do is, once this arsenal expands, we're going to try the war in China, which will allow us to get, hopefully, Shaanxi, allow us to declare war in Shaanxi. Don't know if that'll be just them. It'd be cheaper than justifying war, but sure. But it may also trigger these others as well, which, from a strategic point of view, it would be better to take them on one at a time, for sure. But the amount of political power is just not reasonable. We don't have to do so in time. I would like to put away the great bulk of the war with China before we start just, yeah, probably should train it. Probably good to have a few of those. Here, this is okay. It's very concentrated, but I don't know that I don't want mechanized structures. So what I want to do is duplicate that. Save that so we don't say we if we want it, we don't want it. I just don't want to be making infantry weapons, so I want to turn that over. We're going to slow it up. The rest off. Do that. let's go with mountains. Because although it won't like give you time to build any for to Yunnan, but you start looking. What? What did I see here? I presume this is a paradox thing. There's no deserts in Burma. Unless that somehow seasonally changes. The dry season for that. But there's no desert in Burma. And you know what? If there are, please correct me and post, links to solid information, links to Wikipedia information that there's a desert. I don't necessarily mean like have to be Kalahari sand deserts, but I mean just a very arid, very limited plants type desert can be like a lot of California desert is sort of that. Sort of the manzanita scrub bushes all over the place, but it's very dry. So that kind of that desert. But I do believe that, okay, this is their version of the block. But there are mountains in Burma. There are islands. We may want to fight. We may want to fight into. So here, this. But nice. We may want to. And of course, we want to go out with that. That'll be a good template to have. Right, you can see we're sort of ready to punch here. Take him down fast. Okay, great. And here, another division push in. Take these guys down fast. This, I don't know. Okay, they got one push. Got them. And here, sort of sweep in here and.
Minutes!
Here. They're going to set up a name. These guys.
Rücke! Minutes! Sticker!
The train could trying to measure focus. Bypass. But we don't have declarable. Okay, well, I guess we can. Have that for power. Quite honestly, I've not read all of this National Focus Trees. Forgive me. We're still experimenting. Okay, oh, here we go. This is what we need. Gain, conquer, war goals. So no, today, okay. That's what we want. Oh, 70 days? Okay, that's not really ready to start yet. Pretty soon we're going to go on a radar building. Build radar on the ground support, so let's go with a better. We're in 30 minutes, so let's okay. See, I really like the way they've done these trees. I really can't speak to, because I really don't know without trying to do a bunch of research, to how well they've modeled these particular Japanese models to the historical ones, what they're supposed to represent. You know, like, range obviously is something that is fairly objective, that they can go, oh, the range, you know, effective combat range or whatever, you know, radius is out and back, from fighting time kind of thing. What is that? So we can plug that into the game pretty easy. Some of the other stats may be a little more, you know, especially like on armor. How much armor does a tank have? Well, in the front it has X amount of armor, and on the sides it has Y amount of armor, you know. I've played a lot of miniature tank warfare, and at times you do get good side shots, and you can take them. And of course, the enemy doesn't want to give you the side shots, but you do get the chance at side shots. You know, forget about the rear, because that happens, but that's, you know, too little of a Konnichiwa. Okay, we're pausing this. Okay, that audio should be much better. Sorry about that. Sort of a little mistake there. Okay. So, you know, but how do you judge armor? Some of the lower armor on, let's say, the Panther was pretty weak. Side armor, that was. You know, so, you know, there's, you know, we can sort of object, you know, and obviously some of the micro armor that I played, you rolled the dice and you saw where on the tank you hit. You know, turret, upper hull, lower hull, and so you couldn't, like when we're playing War Thunder, you can certainly try to choose where you aim, but you couldn't choose where you wanted to place your shot, but you would know if you're shooting at the front of the tank or the side of the tank, and that kind of thing. So that can be sort of objectively measured out, this sort of scale of the game. How much armor does X tank have, and then how effective is Y tank gun against it? And they go, well, we, you know, like with a Hetzer, who's rather mobile, low profile, is able to move around to the sides of things with their 75mm gun and take stuff out that they couldn't take out from the front and still be rather effective. Now the Hetzer's sides is pretty weak as well. And they could say, well, the way they were tactically used, they tried to keep, we can argue that and debate that, and that's a healthy thing to do. So I'm presuming the air is well modeled out within black ice, and because I don't know enough to challenge it at all. And if there's a progression through models of a historically, I think it's very legitimate to force a player to walk through it. Again, okay, so decimetric radar. Got that, great. Just go click on our air. Have to walk through models, but like we do in some tank models and like some of these things, if there was this and then that developed into this, but if development of this aircraft really had nothing to do, or wasn't that much of a stepping stone, I don't know, just because I don't know. If it was, then no need, we can skip it if we don't want to do it. Obviously the main reason is we're skipping it is we didn't research this early enough to start building them to make them useful. Obviously it would have been useful to have them, but I'm still very dubious of the amount of research slots that we get versus what's sort of needed, but that's an entirely another question. And again, with that, I will admit that they've done a lot of these things, and maybe Japan should only be doing half as much because I'm doing as much industrial research as, say, America would have been doing or something like that. So that very well could be what's skewing some of my viewpoint here. And the other thing, though, is where and when, and let's go over to the tank one, where we do have we maybe should do some tank. Okay. Where we do have some tank models that we need to step through. I'm all for that, for and when that's a historical thing. But also, and it's where you can go, well, hey, X, and I know the Panzers, X model of, well, a good one is, and I forget what model number it is, specific model letter I should say, but the Panzer III, it started out and they went through early sort of limited run production types, but then they sort of settled on a basic standard model of the 37 millimeter gun Panzer III. Well, once after the Battle of France was over, it was shown that that gun wasn't enough to defeat many of the French tanks, and even where it would defeat them, it was just barely doing so, and that is not going to be a tank for the future, and having trouble with particularly the Matildas, but some of the other heavy British armor as well. That isn't going to be for the future, so we need to put in a 50 millimeter gun. Well, they could get into production fairly quickly shall we say, an intermediate barreled 50 millimeter gun, so that's what they did. And so that's sort of what they had researched the gun enough and researched by and that they had prototypes and they could start putting it in production. They knew they wanted to go to a longer 50 millimeter gun, but that was going to take a while. So with the battles going on in North Africa, with the situation going on with in the Balkans and Russia, do you delay putting the longer, more effective barrel in, and just keep doing the 37s until you get the right 50 done, or do you start doing the 50s today? It sort of makes sense to start doing the 50s today. But if you are going this, okay, well, we want to research a heavier barrel, and you may want to do that even, you don't have to make the same mistakes, in my opinion, that Germany made. So you're going to research the 50 millimeter barrel and get that working before even going into France. So that although early limited production will be 37 millimeter, you may go, okay, well, let's first get the intermediate barrel done and then step through to the longer barrel. And so as a production measure, because you may push some of the stuff a little more than the Wehrmacht did, you may skip the intermediate as a production model because you have production disruption. Let's see, this is going to be 54 days, so let's just get the tank type produced here. We'll just do that. That'll be a short production. We'll get some other stuff. So I like that. Now I also understand the standard sort of, if you will, Hearts of Iron viewpoint of being very flexible, and so that you can just add variants as you please, and you can match the historical ones if you wish or not. And so that I get that too, as another good alternative way of going to say, hey, I want to make our own decisions, and I don't want to have to be forced to walk down the decision trees of everybody else. We're going to do convoy escort here. Oh, that didn't happen, right? Convoy escort here. There we go. So I understand that philosophy too. My opinion is purely a preferred view of wanting to play with history, because we're playing with history, because we're not refighting the same battles just to see if the die roll comes out in slightly better favor. Come down here for what's the year type? 1940. Okay, that's still too soon. We've been neglecting some of these things. Search radar. That will help us a lot, I think. So we're going to do that. That's worth the research time. Japan didn't do that historically. I would do... Oh, come on. I'm going faster. We're getting a lot of monthly saves. More starting texts that keep some of these nations behind a little more. Maybe or maybe change the dates in some of these, but allow, particularly Britain in some case, in the radar cases, to have bonuses for research to get that done faster.
Okay.
To match the historical record.
Yosh.
Over there. You are going to
Okay.
we're not. We don't want. Who's the Marine General? Yeah. We picked him for his skills. So you're going to do a naval invasion. We're going to be close enough with a lot of army there that I don't know if that's going to be too interesting. So we're going to come down there, I think is what we're going to do. I know it is the peninsula and all, but this is mostly just for distraction and that type of shifting the... We need to also look at Some resources. Okay. We need 27. I want to go with the Soviet Union because I'm hoping that we may be changing some of this if there's more aluminum, but I don't know if there is. We're just going to go. It is. I'm going to go with just that for the moment. And of course the other one is oil. Oh, okay, we're going up. Oh my god! We're going from here. These the Sakhalin Islands. This is the Sakhalin Islands or whatever over here. Yeah, Sakhalin. I don't know exactly what this archipelago is called. Kuril Islands. Okay. Up to here is their main Soviet importation thing, as opposed to just coming into Vladivostok from somewhere here. I've hardly laughed like this on the channel before. It's even making me cough. Okay, I don't know if it's because this and this and this is where the state is or something. I don't know. Northeast Siberia. Oh man, I just don't know. Okay, well I don't know what's causing that, but that is a still a better supply for aluminum than trying to, once we're at war, get it from Germany across everybody else. But that's just hilarious. Okay, that's nutty. Now I'm going to talk a little historical / modern, and this isn't politics. This is we'll call it real history. Real history. And it is just, I do this once in a while, of course, as you know, and so well, I don't know, this may if you're really, you can jump towards the end to see if I actually play the game some more. So I don't know how much I'm going to talk on this, but this is something real, and this will, to some degree, maybe even pun intended, affect all of us in our lives. Maybe partially because of what governments do regarding this, but also the environment may change. Okay, environmental or global warming, and then they've changed the term to some degree to climate change. Okay. First off, let's agree with one thing fundamentally. Climate change is very real, okay? I don't care what you want to say or think about it. Climate change is very real. But before either side starts jumping up and down and agreeing with me or being mad at me about this, I am not saying the Al Gore and other climate change models are what is real. Okay, because we know the climate changes, and I'm not just talking it goes from summer to winter and back again. I'm talking about shifts in overall climate, and sometimes it's regionally, and that's very important. Sometimes it's regional, and sometimes it's global. Sometimes one area can affect a different area, but other times it is just a localized effect. Okay, the climate changes, period. When I was growing up, they were talking about the coming ice age. I'm serious. You look at Time magazine and a lot of stuff, they talk about the coming ice age. Now we're, of course, talking about global warming. I remember, what was it, I think maybe 2 years ago or something, they went down to, of course, this isn't even here, but they went down a global warmingist group, hired a ship, bunch of scientists, climate scientist types, hired a ship to go monitor the ice loss in Antarctica to see how much and how fast it's shrinking. Well, that ship got stuck in the ice, and it wasn't just because of bad captaining or piloting or whatever you want to say, but actually their research shows the ice cap in Antarctica, this was like 2 years ago, 3 years ago max, something like that, and may have changed since then, but had actually measurably and significantly had expanded. The amount of ice, and we're not just talking an inch or so or a half an inch thickness of ice, it's the that may have expanded some, and I don't know how much, but also just the general ice sheet covering more of the ocean, and that is thick, fellow humans. That is thick. Okay, so that has been expanding. May have stopped expanding, may have started to contract. I don't know the most recent data, but this is relatively recent data. Antarctica is expanding the ice sheet. Why is it expanding? I don't know. They were used to be worried about CFCs, the chlorophyll carbon emissions from spray cans, and there was I think over Antarctica that was like maybe creating a big hole in the ozone, and since they've stopped producing all that stuff, that may have closed up, and that may be why the ice sheets are expanding. Again, I don't know why, but I do know it's expanding. Now, compared to supposedly, and again, part of this is how they're measuring it, and I think there's some flaws in the method of measurement, but supposedly the Arctic is getting 2 degrees warmer of overall warming temperature than the rest of the world. And how are they measuring that? Where are they measuring that? How effectively is that measured versus the northern hemisphere versus the hemisphere? Because I just talked about the southern one apparently getting colder. And again, I don't know why Antarctic is getting warmer. Could be something like the shift in the Gulf current. It could be because too many cow farts are coming out of Texas cattle. I don't know why it is getting warmer. But one of my uncles said last time he's flying back from Europe, flying back over Greenland, he says there was much less ice than there was 20 years ago when he was flying to Europe, and I totally believe him on this. Now, he's, of course, a global warming advocate, and this is just the most terrible thing, and we have to protect it. But then, of course, I know that since this ice cap has retreated up here, they have found Viking Age farms that could not have been farms under the conditions that obtained, say, in the 1940s. Okay, meaning if it would unfreeze or something, there wasn't enough time for a growing season, even the sort of northern growing season, for it to happen. Okay, so I know for a fact it was warmer in Greenland when the Vikings first showed up here. Now that is at basically the end of the Dark Ages and into the Middle Ages. Okay. Now there is what is sort of known as the medieval warm period. The Dark Ages, it actually got, okay, step back further. It was fairly warm, and they have tree rings that they try to date, but they don't have good measurable scientific level temperature measurements from the past. They just don't have it. Don't let anybody fool you. You can talk tree rings. Well, that's just growth. Does growth equal temperature? I don't think so. There's other things than temperature affects growth in trees. It can be amounts of water. It can be, and some of these are from long dead trees that they get out of buildings, and they can date and they can compare and work their way back. So it could be soil conditions, all kinds of things that can affect it. That weather temperature is an element, but is not necessarily the determinant element in it. Okay, so no one can tell you how warm, in a scientific method thing, how warm it was in the classical era, and by that I mean sort of the Great Roman Empire era. In the Dark Ages, it got colder. Part of that, I believe, is and it also got darker. I do believe that for a brief period of time, for a few years. So I believe that is because of and I'm sorry if I'm missing this part up, is because of a volcano explosion, or maybe it was one of the meteorite strikes somewhere that put a lot of dust up in the atmosphere. But the Dark Ages, no, it wasn't mostly dark at night or in the day. No, but I'm just saying, for a while I think that got dark a little bit and caused temperature in the northern hemisphere to cool off some. That's what I'm talking about. So in the Dark Ages, it got colder. Then it gets warmer in the Middle Ages. It's the Middle Ages warm period they talk about, and there are written evidence of, in this part of Britain, of growing grapes and growing good grapes, that the French are complaining about Northern English, not just English, but Northern English wines being too much of a competition for them. To the best of my understanding, today you cannot outside grow grapes of any effective amount in Northern England, and without doing greenhouses and other sorts of things. It's just too cold. So it was warmer in the Middle Ages. Okay. We have again the Greenland thing, and one can go the name, it was called Greenland, but also that they found that they did a lot more farming than they originally thought, though they think the population was maybe half the size that they thought it was, because at some point all of the Vikings die out, whether they the last one sort of close up shop and sail back to Iceland, where the Vikings remained, or whether they just died of starvation, or whether they intermarried with some Eskimos, though there weren't Eskimos there at the time in Greenland, to the best of my understanding. The Vikings die out in Greenland. This, I think, is primarily because of climate change. They could, and they did supposedly shift a lot of their behavior to a lot more, fishing might not be the right term, it was maybe a bit more seal hunting and other sorts of gathering of resources. But that, with the Vikings, they could not sustain it, but they found more and more Viking farms. And there was, for a while, a significant export of like walrus tusk ivory or narwhal horns or whatever that was coming. The Vikings were doing a lot of specialized resource gathering that was being sent back, and a certain amount of food that was coming this way, but they were also growing food, but they couldn't sustain themselves, so that died out. And they're still don't know whether they, the last people died of starvation and died out, or whether they were, the last groups were finally, this is just getting too bad, and were able to sail back to Iceland and whatever. So it was warmer there, and this was in the Middle Ages. In the Renaissance, I know this very well, in Scotland it gets colder. And I know this partly, and again I've said earlier, we don't have scientific data, but I know that this gets colder. because I know history and I also know cultural anthropology and physical anthropology of Scotland, because I've done research and literally some of the anthropological researches in Scotland in my life. And part of it is clothing changed. They start wearing a lot more wool. In the Renaissance period is where the kilt starts to come in. It starts out as a huge blanket, but before then there is no real evidence of a Breckenmore or Philly bag or whatever you want to call the sort of the great kilt, before it was all stitched up, being worn. There is very early evidence of a tartan type material with wool, but they weren't wearing them as kilts. They did wear trousers to some degree, but trousers were mostly worn by horse riding peoples and individuals in the Celtic world. And in some parts of the Celtic world that was a lot of the men. In Scotland that never really was. A lot of the men's dress was simply wearing a shirt. They didn't wear anything but a shirt. Now the shirt would come down to their knees. Okay, so think of a linen, because they didn't have cotton, a linen shirt that would come down to their knees. And the very early Renaissance type drawings of some of the Highland men, they sort of have them carrying a blanket over their shoulder. This is sort of where the blanket starts to convert into the early Philly bag, the Breckenmore, the great kilt, and starts to become more and more formalized. And they start to put more and more layers of clothing on, including these are the poor people. These aren't the rich people that could show off their wealth. The poor people started wearing more and more layers of clothing, to the point of wearing the great kilt, a shirt, shirt under it, a great kilt, a waistcoat, and a jacket. And in not just in winter, not just in cold times, but all the time, they start wearing more and more layers of clothing. In the Highlands, and then the Highlands, well, it never looks like that. I mean, there's never ice up floating on the water in there in this period, even in the cold period. Down at sea level, it's cold. It does snow, for sure. At the higher levels, snow can stay all year round at times, but it gets cold. And this is, again, I'm just taking long enough that I know we've already ended the gaming episode. So if you don't want to hear my thoughts on this, you can go away happily and catch the next episode for more gaming. But so I don't mean to subject any of you who don't want to listen to this and just come here for the gaming and sort of the World War II talk. That's fine. Like I say, you can go on if you're uninterested. But Scotland gets colder in the Renaissance. Where I've studied it mostly in detail, and at the time when I was doing it, I was talking to some of the experts on tartan in the 18th century, in the world, of 18th century tartans. One in particular was Peter MacDonald. I got to know a little bit years ago and visited with him. And he was doing vegetable dye, hand weave tartan, so not doing these sort of modern colors. He was trying to figure out what they used to vegetable dye the cloth, and how would that look, and how did they get it to the dyes to adhere to the cloth, because it will wash out, but to what degree. And so he was doing all of the real research, getting all of his hands on every single original scrap that he could have tartan on to examine, whether not necessarily own, but get his hands on to examine. And so he was doing the leading research into basically 18th century Highland tartans, but that also includes their wear and their use and everything else. So I know this for a historical fact and an archaeological fact, because that's dealing with the items either dug up or the items that we can prove that are from the past that are still with us today. So this is historical and archaeological fact that things got colder in the northern hemisphere. I don't know in the Renaissance what's going on down here. In the early parts of the Renaissance, until 1492, nobody's getting over here, and so I don't know that there's any good records of what's going on and what. So I don't know what's happening in the southern hemisphere. really. But I'm talking about the northern hemisphere, and more specifically, I have a relative, a cousin who works for the California state government, and asked him if they had done any research on various sea levels going back, and because he deals with the coast and some of the erosion. And no, not really, and mostly to some, within the time frame even that we're talking about in, there's a fair amount of erosion, and it's very hard to try to look back, he was saying. And so I really thought this would be an interesting thing if you can find some, I don't know, hard granite that you can look back to and try to then carbon date the seashells attached, and know that X type of seashell needs to be in, and because some of them need to be both in the water and out of the water in tidal regions that get affixed to things, because they need to be in the air, they need to be in the water, they need to go back and forth, and other types that must always be underwater, or they don't, will die, for any, half a day or whatever out of the water, they die. So there's certain types of stuff that you can try to find that are old and carbon date to the past and find out where they are, to try to determine, not like dinosaur or even saber-tooth, the megafauna periods in North America. I'm just talking back a couple 300 years to try to find out some of the sea level changes, and then to try to find out some of the, if we can, try to find out the regional temperature changes here. But I do know this very well here in Europe. So it gets cold. Now it starts to warm up. I do know that the last frost fair was in 1814. Now I knew about frost fair for some time, and I knew the last one was right around 1805, 1810. The reason I know the last one was from a Doctor Who episode just recently, in which they postulated that it was some under river beast that was freezing up the Thames every year, causing frost fair. I don't believe it. You can believe in whether that was a space alien monster or just some sort of prehistoric monster that somehow freezes water. I don't know, but really it's climate change. So in 1814 and before, going back to the Renaissance, in the Thames River at the location of London, it would freeze over thick enough in which they would build wooden structures that would not go through the ice, that were I don't want to say permanent, because they were obviously removed once the ice starts to go away, but were significant structures that would be up there all through the frost fair, through the winter. To the best of my knowledge, and obviously you stop the frost fair, you may still freeze over, but just nowhere near a thick enough ice to be safe. But at least in most winters for the 20th century, but this is starting before the Industrial Revolution. It's happened in Britain, but before the Industrial Revolution is kicked up enough dust or other debris into the air to significantly change the environment. And if you want to argue about that, think of all of the medieval and 18th century localized fires of various types in London just to heat homes. Okay, the industrialization that a lot of it was happening up in here, but the industrialization that was happening in here wasn't significantly more than the massive amounts of home fires burning in and around London, keeping people warm during the winter, as well as cooking in the summer, to significantly change the environment. So the environment had already been changing before industrialization of humanity. Okay, we know this. The real Industrial Revolution, 1814, maybe just, depends on how you date things, maybe just sort of starting to kick off. Just for those of you who are not entirely familiar, the Battle of Waterloo is in 1815, a year after this. So this is still very much my opinion, the 19th century starts in 1815. If you look at it as a cultural and political time period, not obviously the date starts in 1800, but the effects of the 19th century start in 1850. So this is really before the big push of the 19th century industrialization. Britain is industrializing, but Britain is still fighting wars on the continent with Napoleon, wars with America, so they're still not and they're still facing all kinds of pirate and privateer attacks against their shipping, and having to move throughout the Napoleonic era, and especially once they get into war with Americans, having to move all of their shipping, their trade in convoys, because the British did very well at sea against the American Navy during the War of 1812, but they lost a lot of ships to the American privateers going raiding their shipping during the War of 1812. That really hurt them. So because there's more money into going out and stealing ships than the U.S. government had to build more naval vessels, and privateers would run away from every naval vessel they could possibly see in time, but attack every commercial ship they could get their hands on. So it's sort of what you're targeting. So Britain is busy doing a lot of this and trying to industrialize during this time, but it really hits its stride once peace arrives. So we have evidence of climate change, 1814, the start of the 18th century. Things are getting warmer slowly. Frost fares over. We can look at other things going on. So get back to, because this sort of spark coming up here. They're now, I think right now as I'm making this, in a conference up, I think somewhere in Alaska. The Russian foreign minister was there, the American foreign minister was there, but some of the other conferences are going on dealing with the Arctic Circle and trade, because it's now getting to the point that you can now, at least during summer, routinely put ships through there. And get back to a little bit and there's a movie called Northwest Passage starring Spencer Tracy, but long before that, and as part of, I guess it was it who was it that found Bay up here, I forget, but the various attempts to find a Northwest Passage around Canada, because they found one down here to get, obviously, around here, but then through the passage here, they presumed that there was also going to be a passage to get around North America this way. And obviously Canada isn't this big, it's a projection of the map. Canada's big, but not that big. So now this is becoming a reality and not just an icebreaker type reality. So we're looking at that. People are getting scared about climate change and what this is going to do to us. What I am trying to say is, I don't know that there wasn't a Northwest Passage, at least in summer, during the medieval warm period when the Vikings settled here. And obviously we do know that down in Newfoundland, and I think down in Nova Scotia now, we have fairly good evidence of Vikings at least showing up and making some settlements, as well, that they talked about Vinland in this part of the world, and with their language, Vinland sort of means wine land, berry land, but it could be grapes. But do they mean grapes, or do they just mean other berries? I don't know. But they found stuff that would seem to be, at least in the 20th century, not growable so much in this part of the world, to the best of my understanding, which led some of them to believe that they really could come down further because of some of the stuff that you talked about, but maybe it was just because it was warmer and some of the stuff grew up here. So I don't know that what we are coming to is a bad thing in the weather, because even the Al Gore global warming alarmists very much said, at first things are going to get better for humanity. I don't know. I don't know. But the next like 4 or 5 degrees of average warming will be a benefit to humanity. It was only after that, and then he also projected rapid, but after that to be bad detriments to humanity. And he projected this as some sort of upward spike that was going to continue to trend. That theoretically could be, from my understanding, when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, it was considerably warmer than it is now. I don't know what considerably means in that sense. Meaning I don't think anything so warm, at least in the overall planet, that humans couldn't survive, but might not be good for us. I'm not suggesting that. So I don't know what the climate's going to do. But what I do know is that it has been, I believe, warmer than it is now in the past. I mean, I'm talking within the last 500 to 1,000 years. And humanity has definitely had, obviously, I think much more of a trauma that at least hit Europe was, the various plagues, killing, half the population or more, at least in some areas. Some areas, at least in some towns, it get almost to 100% of the population. Everybody died. But in a lot of other areas, there were survivors and significant numbers, but huge amounts of people died from the plagues and some of these other things that caused greater upheavals than a climate shift, though climate shifts very well, especially people that are living on the margins, that humanity and animals, generally speaking, will grow to the level that will only stop once it becomes hard to live. There'll be so many wolves out there so long as there's food for them, and they'll start to die off once there's not enough food in the winter or something. That's sort of the way it goes. Humanity is now, to some degree, met and, as stated in one book, more people now die from overeating than do from undereating. And that's the stat that's being put out there. We've looked at Somalia and some of the other famine areas, but sometimes that's only, and obviously we've talked about millions of dead here, but so only 20 or 30,000 people dying in a famine, not making light of their death, but only that number, where you have obesity, fatness, killing millions of Americans from heart attacks from eating too much food. Now, they don't eat so much food that they die immediately. It's just their eating habits get them so fat, and they die prematurely because of being overweight and other complications. I'd rather die from being too fat than not having enough food. Some problems aren't as bad as other problems. I am not fat, so maybe I'm talking from skinny privilege here, but so that's sort of the thing. So we've to a large degree overcome the food question for at least most of humanity. We're no longer seeing, I forget the Beatles, the one song about Bangladesh. I think it may be called Bangladesh, about the famines in Bangladesh. I don't know that we're getting massive famines in Bangladesh. Often, and a lot of it is a lot of people are living on marginal lands that, with the way these rivers come, they get flooded out and shifted and whatever, and that just unfortunately happens when you live on a river delta from a big massive river. Nothing you can really do about it other than leave. But with the modern, that they're now Bangladeshis are no longer Indians, they're sort of limited in where they can go. But it's sort of the reality. So food is no longer the main killer, or lack thereof, of maybe the main killer for in having too much, but no longer the lack of it is the main killer of humanity. So as a species, we've changed what most animals do for max population scale. So, like I say, go back to the beginning. Global climate change, or at least significant regional climate change, which is different, well, no, global climate change is real. There is real warming in the northern hemisphere. The best of my understanding, there is real cooling in the southern hemisphere, because if it's getting colder in Antarctica, it's getting colder down in Argentina. Now, maybe not so much that anybody notices, maybe not so much that any of the plants no longer grow in particular areas, and similarly in South, now these Argentina, I believe, is further south than Africa, because this is where the equator is here, and that runs through here. Sorry, this map isn't good for it, but again, that affects South Africa. South Africa is sort of known for some grapes, but also down in Argentina and Chile is known too for grapes, and that's getting colder and may get so cold that some of that goes away. I don't know, but it may not change enough that it's noticeable for the plants to shift and change. But that is what is happening. I personally believe, again, I don't know, personally believe that man has no substantial impact on any of this change. We may even be the main impactor on the change, but I believe man, but again, I've talked about facts. This is my belief. My belief is that we do not have a substantial impact on global climate change. Regional climate change, hey, when I was growing up in LA, you see these mountains here? There's sort of an inversion layer, and it was hard to breathe with all the smog, especially in some of the southern months. It was bad because the smog couldn't go away, and that put a layer of sort of soot up over us, and that had to affect the climate, in which actually, I don't know if it made it warm or cool, because it's sort of an inversion layer, because heat's supposed to rise, but with the inversion layer, the heat was trapped. Now it's still trapped. The heat is still trapped. Nothing of that has changed, but we're no longer putting nearly the pollution up in there. We no longer have smog alerts. That when I was growing up, the air is so much cleaner in the greater LA basin. So I don't know exactly how that's affected having less smog. Does that make it warmer or cooler? I think it probably makes it cooler, but maybe it makes it warmer for more sun to get in. That could be. That's probably it, because if there's that inversion layer the trapping it, probably getting more sunlight. So the inversion layer is still there, even if it's even if you don't see it because there's smog trapped. Actually, one of the early Indian names, before the Spanish showed up, was like Smoke Valley or Smoke Region or something like that, because the Indians noticed from their smoke fires, the smoke would go up in this region and sort of be trapped in there and wouldn't go away. So this is just a local phenomenon with the mountains and in an inversion layer. So probably with the clearer skies, we have warmed up here, and man has affected it by cleaning up the amount of smog. And so I am absolutely sure that all the humans living here and paving over the ground, which reflects a lot of heat up into the local environment, is affecting this part of the world. Absolutely. And so any other place, and I'm sure that I understand that a lot of this part of China is just hugely smog-ridden, terrible, cut-awful place to live, that you almost have to have a breath mask to go outside much of the time. I'm sure humanity locally, at least around the cities and whatever, is affecting the environment. But I don't know if all this smog is appreciably affecting what's going on out here in the weather. I just don't know that. And on a global scale, I don't believe that man is affecting the weather. I think it can be, and if you may, well, what is? Well, weather patterns can change, including ocean currents. That can be a thing that changes. Now, why are they changing? Not sure. I do know that the sun puts off energy, heat, if you will, and we see solar flares and other sort of outbursts of heat coming from it, and sometimes it goes in certain directions. And you can talk to a solar scientist, but I'm sure he'll tell you that it is not a precise constant. Now, it's probably within a region of of amount of energy that it's putting off, that's causing us heat to warm up. But I think it can vary, and I think it can vary to what the sun's time scale. It may be very short period of time, but to human time scale, it may be up and down amounts of amount of energy put off by the sun that would fluctuate over a few 200 or 300 year period. But get back to it, what is it, the Tunguska impact, and there's been and some of them didn't actually reach their service, but it come down and basically explode some of the large meteorite type strikes that they just get so hot that they go off, and they've found lots of flattened trees, some of these other things, that they can postulate that some of these impacts are near impacts with their fireballs put up so much smoke or other sorts of fine debris up into the jet stream, and that can stay up there for many years, and maybe even the hundreds of years. I don't know. Someone who may want to check into that, can affect the how much sunlight gets through, which will affect weather patterns, which will shift weather patterns and shift things. So we can look at whether it's Vesuvius going off. A major one was the St. Helena Thera, whichever one of these little Greek islands it is, that went off. That's probably one of the biggest one in the history of mankind, the amount of debris that it puts up. Now this is what destroys, in my opinion, the first modern age of man, well before Rome, well before Greece, the sort of Minoan age, but they're finding more and more super cultures and structures that they're identifying. They've identified all the way out here in the Azores, they've identified huge, meaning multi-story, like 3 or 4 story high buildings, and also, if you want to call them pyramids, but mounds of rock that were man-made, that predates the Portuguese discovery. The Portuguese just really sort of didn't recognize or ignored. We're under I don't know if jungle is the right term, but under canopies, but the Portuguese really ignored. And some of that may be Roman era, but some of it they think goes back to sort of the Minoan age. This is sort of the age of Stonehenge and some of the other cultures that are along here. I believe that there was a very high culture, because we would look at the Santorini, they had, I don't know if they're quite flush toilets, but they had, and this is one of my things from modernity, is they had water, some sort of water type systematic toilets. So did Rome. So this is the second modern age of man, is sort of the Roman Hellenistic era. And then we're in the third age of modernity. I also look at the artwork that they found and some of the other stuff for me to go. Of course, we know the least about the Minoan culture, but three ages. So that destroyed much of the cultures around here, and sort of gets into the heroic age of the Mycenaeans, the mainland Greeks, which were really sort of rugged type people, not the later cultural people that they became. That put up a lot of ash debris, and so we can look at several of these things. And then they also the Krakatoa. Krakatoa's over here, I think. Krakatoa explosion in the 19th century that puts up. So you can just have a few big volcanoes go off over a time period. Some of them may have been not recorded by Western science or history or whatever else effectively, and that can shift and cause a, shall we say, cascading of events that can change climate significantly and take many years to go away. And so we could easily see another series of, like, the Mount St. Helens volcano that went off, what was it, somewhere up here, that changed the local climate somewhat. But we can see several of those things go off and change world climate, which would be a cooling trend. So hey, if you want to spark a few big volcanoes going off, if you want to deal with this global warming, and it very well may be happening. So it may be a combination of Earth events and sun events and other things that are affecting climate change. But looking back over, we'll call it the last 4,000 years, because I'm a historian, so I look at sort of history and to some degree archaeology. 4,000 years of man. I don't know of enough of anything that, and I shifts in and out, and we can look at other periods, but those are the periods that I know well. That there is significant, at least regional, climate change. So that means there's global climate change to some degree. So we know it's happening. But I don't know that anything within this sort of thing that we need to worry about that's going to cause significant doom to humanity. Yeah, it might mean some of the low-lying deltas in Bangladesh may get overrun, and there's just nothing we can do, and there's millions of people there. Now that doesn't mean I think millions of people are going to drown. No, they're going to have to migrate somewhere else, whether it's to India or whether it's to other parts of Bangladesh or something. And there may be a few of the low-lying Andaman Islands or what are these, the Maldives here? Yes, see, I sort of know these things. Some of the islands, some of these sea level may rise enough that they become uninhabitable. So they may not go underwater, but enough big storms once in a while may cause them to go underwater briefly, that people just can't reliably stay there. Yeah, and it may suck for them, and humanity may be able to do something good to help them out. I'm not saying that we don't do that, but there may be bad things that happen. But on a global catastrophic level, I don't see that coming. I just don't see that coming. A localized thing, I can see that happening, but globally. So this global warming thing, as an alarm, I don't think is an alarm. I think it is something that needs to be watched and taken care of, partially by new treaties for how you deal with the the Arctic, because the retreat of the ice means that we can drill more up there, and there are definitely, obviously, anti-drillists just on principle here in America, and that they may want us not to drill there. Well, that doesn't mean the Russians aren't going to drill. And if we don't, try to get as much, we, being the U.S., Canada, Greenland, and I don't know, Norway or Finland or whoever, Iceland, whoever might be able to make a claim to a piece of the Arctic resource real estate, shouldn't get in their claims as best they could. They should. And then whatever sort of, shall we say, sensible, reasonable drilling precautions that should be made, it put into treaty that would bind equally the Russians as it binds the Americans and the Canadians. Yeah, because I don't want huge amounts of oil spills either. I'm sort of in that group that, yeah, I don't want big oil spills, but that doesn't mean the solution in my mind isn't, oh well, then no drilling. No, to me the solution is let's do it responsibly. Okay, thank you if you've listened all the way through my monologue here on climate change and my true understandings of history, as well as my beliefs and thoughts, because there's both. I try to be very upfront to you what I know and what I just sort of believe based on that. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for liking the videos, and post questions, whether in comments and suggestions, whether about the game or if you've got good things to dispute me on climate change or support me. I'd love hearing from you. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.